Let's talk about the present and what happened yesterday as well with our buddy from Sports Illustrated, the man who writes the MMQB for you. Albert Breer is back here on the program. Good to see you, Bert. How are you?
Sir.
Good to see you, Rich. Thanks for having me.
You got a new camera set up, Albert?
Yeah, it's a little clearer, right? We had to fiddle with it a little bit. I'm not exactly like a technical expert on this stuff, but they were able to walk me through it. I think it looks a little better.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Man, I like it. A new fantasy team name, 4K Breer.
There you go. There you go.
Breer in 4K.
Looks like he's in 8K.
Okay.
Just want you to know I'm making an effort here, Rich.
Fantastic. All right, so much to ask you about, brother. Why did the Jets do what they did yesterday?
You know, I think it was really about the opportunities that got put in front of them. You know, the Colts initiated the conversation on Sauce, and, you know, the Cowboys had been calling around and had actually broached the topic of Quinnen when the Micah Parsons talks were going on. So, you know, I think it's interesting, you know, hearing about the Jets process and what they went through and how they've assessed their roster. And, you know, one big thing I think at the beginning of all of this was when they signed Sauce Gardner to the contract in July. It was like, let's make sure this is a responsible contract that we could trade, because you just never know what's going to come along. You never know what's going to happen. So, you know, you want to reward the player, but then you also want to give yourself that flexibility, and that pays off here. And, you know, I think there's still Darren Moji and Aaron Glenn in an evaluation process on their roster. And I do think like their view of what they were in July and August hasn't really come to fruition. I think that goes without saying, right? So they're at 1-7. And these offers start coming in, and they've sort of put word out that they were open for business on almost everybody in the roster. Quinnen was one guy that seemed like he was off limits, you know, along with Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner. And once the bidding started, you know, I think the Micah Parsons deal sort of became the bellwether on Sauce. And so, you know, that was 2 first-round picks and a quality player, which, you know, the Cowboys got Kenny Clark in that deal, and the Jets wind up with A.D. Mitchell here. And then I think the completion of the Sauce deal sort of kicked the Quinnen talks into overdrive. And now, you know, they're set up. I think the most interesting thing about this, right? Like, so we all know they've got 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks this coming year, and then 3 first-round picks in what should be a bumper crop, you know, in 2027. That's what NFL people are talking about how good that draft is. But in the time being, like, they still have a nice core of young players. Garrett Wilson at receiver. We'll see if they re-sign Breece. But then, you know, the tackle positions, Olu Fashanu and Armand Membu at defensive end. They've got Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald. So there's still young talent to work with there. And, you know, really when you're talking about their timeline, their ability to get a quarterback done, now they've got a lot of capital going forward.
So let me just hit the 2027 draft, 2026 and 27 drafts, because it's not just for the Jets fan base out there. Yeah. There's the Browns as well. There's other ones clearly that might be in their minds quarterback needy or prospect needy. And we spoke to Daniel Jeremiah last week, Albert, and he's like, you know, I haven't really grinded the tape just yet, but I have no earthly idea who the first overall pick of the 2026 draft. And we all know the quarterback class it hasn't really come to the fore. The conversations that we were having, it sounds real quaint now, about Arch Manning and you know, the Browns being asked, you know, point blank, you know, what about Arch before the season even began, right? Like that was asked of ownership. You were shaking your head. You know what I mean? So
I mean, it was crazy though, because you remember me talking to everybody off the ledge in May. I do feel vindicated with this one. You know what I mean?
Of course. So, but walk me through what you are hearing about those classes as we're now post trade deadline, and there's a lot of teams that have fan bases already looking forward to next year. Albert.
Yeah. So like for the most part, what I've heard about 26 is the top of the draft isn't very strong. And, you know, you've got Bain from Miami as defensive end. You know, you've got Proctor, the tackle from Alabama. Like, there are some names that are thrown around up there, Caleb Downs at Ohio State. But I don't think that you're looking at it and saying, like, God, man, if you're in the top 10 or 15, you're going to walk away with a franchise player at a premium position. I just don't know that exists at the top of this year's draft. Then look ahead a year. Right? Look into 2027. You have Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. You have Ryan Williams at Alabama. You have a couple of edge rushers in Colin Simmons at Texas and Dylan Stewart at South Carolina. You've got a premium corner in Leonard Moore at Notre Dame. And oh, by the way, the quarterbacks, like, I don't know where these guys are going to be a year from now. So this is just speculative.
Sure.
But Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. You have C.J. Carr at Notre Dame. You have Arch Manning potentially then, if he can improve, coming out in 27 out of Texas. You have Julian Sand at Ohio State. So, like, I know we always kind of like look at this like, but wait until next year. You know what I mean? Like, but it does feel like you're looking at a lot of guys in that class who are top end players now and were contributing as true freshmen. A lot of those guys were playing as true freshmen, you know? And so, like, that was part of the Jets' thinking was, okay, how do we want this trade structured? And they actually asked the Cowboys for a first-round pick in 27 rather than 26, taking the 2 in 26. And that was the reason why. And I think you're going to see some of that thinking as we get closer to the draft, too, unless we see big jumps from some of these guys over the course of the next couple of months that'll be in the 26 class. I think you are going to see some teams that are going to be at least open to the idea of moving 26 picks into 27.
How about that? What's your reporting on the Chiefs coming close to Breece Hall? What's your reporting on that, Albert?
Well, I mean, obviously that ties to, a current injury they have with Isaiah Pacheco. Now, they do expect Pacheco back, but depth is a question at that position. Pacheco has been banged up a lot over the last couple of years. They didn't have him at the end of last year, which obviously was a problem for them. And so, the idea of adding a running back was certainly on the board for them. So, they've got an older player in Kareem Hunt there now. Brashard Smith's a really interesting weapon, and he is a running back by trade. But the idea of adding a player was definitely on their radar, as well as adding a defensive tackle potentially over the last week or so. I just think the price was too high, There was a point earlier in the year where I think you might have been able to get Breece Hall for a fourth from the Jets. But, this is another one of those things. Like the Jets, I think, have been really intentional about evolving their value on their players over the course of the year. And, even though they haven't been very good, Breece Hall has been so central to what they're trying to do offensively. And his value is bumped up even a little bit by Braylon Allen, who they thought a lot of being hurt. They thought Allen was going to be almost like a 1A, 1B with Hall, and not having him, I think, made Hall even more valuable to what they're doing in the here and the now. So I don't think that the Chiefs were going to go to a third-round pick on a player that's just a rental, and that's what Breece Hall would be with an expiring contract.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. So Chris Greer wouldn't have traded Jalen Phillips? You know what I mean? Like, it didn't seem like, that there was such a fire sale by the Dolphins that move had to be made, unless, again, we all look around and only talk about what we see. You obviously might have more vision on what else was going on behind the scenes in a lot of these places. And let's start with the Dolphins. Was Jaylen Waddle close? Like, why is he still on the Dolphins right now?
I would say, like, we're talking before Chris Greer was let go on Friday. I would say, like, the other 31, the teams that were talking to the Dolphins were really under the impression that there were guardrails on Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel, just as far as what they were able to do because of the tenuous future of the franchise. Now, they were open to listening on almost anybody. Like Jaylen Waddle was kind of a no. I'd say Chop Robinson probably a no, but everyone else they were open for business on. It's just, could you really get a deal to the finish line with Chris Greer's job on the line the way it was? And I would say after Chris Greer was let go on Friday, things opened up a little bit. Right. And, I think Champ Kelly had a little bit of freedom, like, hey, like, see what's out there for some of the players on the roster. Jalen Phillips made sense. Of course, he's up after the year, so this is a rental. The chance to get a top 100 draft pick was really, really attractive, when you're in the middle of a lost year. But they easily could have moved Minkah Fitzpatrick if the right trade had come, the right offer had come across the table. I think they would have been open to moving, Bradley Chubb or a Matthew Judon. Like, those sorts of things were definitely in play. I think the two players that were closer to untouchable, I'm not saying anybody's untouchable because we saw with the Jets' actions that everybody's got a price. The two players I think were a little closer to untouchable for them would have been Jaylen Waddle and Chop Robinson.
Okay. Now, did the Steelers and Bills not consider themselves receiver needy? And again, I know the way the fan bases are looking at it. Even if any fan base that thinks they could use a receiver sees Rashid Shaheed go to Seattle and watch Jacoby Myers go to Jacksonville for a grouping of third-day picks. And why did that happen and other places not get anybody, Albert?
So I think, well, first of all, like one thing I've learned doing this for over 20 years is that everybody thinks their team needs a receiver for a couple of reasons. One, like it's fun to watch receivers and there's a fantasy football effect there. And two, you can put a lot of them on the field at once. So everybody feels like they could use a better two or yet a better three. It's just sort of the reality of the way people look at this. I'd say in the case of the Steelers, they like the group that they have now. And, I think guys like Calvin Austin and, Roman Wilson, like were guys that they really like that they've developed. Austin was somebody that they felt like, really, coming out of last year was ready to take a step forward. DK has been great. And so like, I just look at where the Steelers are. They still want to be a draft and develop team. And was the juice worth the squeeze with any of those guys where you're going to step in the way of the development of one of your younger guys? You also have the ability there to play with multiple tight ends, which they've got great depth at the tight end position. I'd say the Bills is a little bit different in that, like, I don't think receiver was their top priority. Did they kick tires? Yeah, I mean, they called New Orleans on Olave and Shaheed, and they did their due diligence there. I think if they had made a trade over the last couple of days, the likelihood is it would have been for a defensive tackle. And the reason why is because Ed Oliver got hurt. And Ed Oliver, you could argue, is their most important defensive player. He's injured for the second time. They might get him back. Like there's hope that they could get him back in the playoffs, but that's no sure thing. And so, I know after the way that they played defensively, the other night, like the idea was to like, hey, can we make this sustainable and can we add something there? And I think defensive tackle would have been higher on their list than receiver.
I mean, again, you're taking a look at the teams that are sitting atop their conferences, and the 2-1 seeds were active. Obviously the Eagles did what they usually do, which is add to the line and the back end, right? Yep. And also the Colts doing what they did, and I'm wondering, what you would think of the, if you will, take that I had at the end of my first hour of this show, Albert, is that, you add Sauce, totally get it, understood. Yep. Flip 2 1s for him, it's a high price. But when you flip 2 1s, that gives you the indication that you're not going to go in the quarterback market in the draft. Yeah. And I'm wondering if do you think they've made their evaluation through 9 games of Daniel Jones and say, he's the guy? This is it? This is our guy?
I think I'd like to be Daniel Jones's agent right now.
Right?
No, I think Daniel Jones has a lot of leverage, So, and with I think the franchise tag is going to be up over $45 million this year. So, I mean, I think it's fair to make the assessment, looking at all of this, the mosaic of it, that this is a doubling down on their core, right? Like, so this is basically saying we don't have major needs yet left, right? Like we believe in. And you go down the list: Bernard Raymond, Quentin Nelson, Braden Smith, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, Jonathan Taylor, DeForest Buckner, Zaire Franklin,
Tyler Warren,
all those guys, right? Like, so it's basically saying, like, yep, we're good. We've got our core for the next few years. These picks mean less to us now. So we're pushing our chips in. We're going to fill the one hole we have. We're going to turn what was a weakness. And they've been asking around on corners for the last couple of weeks, right? Like they're going to get Charvarius Ward back off of injured reserve. And now Sauce Gardner comes in, and ostensibly they're going to turn what was a weakness, the biggest weakness into their roster, into a huge strength. So, I think there's that element of it. It is doubling down there. And you're right. Like giving away 2 first-round picks does cut you off at the knees when it comes to the chance to acquire a quarterback over the next couple of years. And so that tells you that they're all in on Daniel Jones and that they're going to move forward with Daniel Jones the same way, the Buccaneers brought in Baker Mayfield as a reclamation project and then doubled down on him. I'd expect the Colts will do the same thing with Jones, and rightfully so. I mean, last weekend notwithstanding, and that wasn't great against the Steelers. He's looked like a different quarterback in Indianapolis.
I mean, it's amazing how things turn, right? It's amazing how things work in that respect. And then Seattle going ahead and adding a burner to an offense that is featuring, I was saying yesterday, Albert, your guy, JSN, he's threatening a 2,000-yard receiving season. That's how amazing he has been. And Darnold looks even better than he did in Minnesota. You know, like he really has stepped it up. Seattle's no joke. And they just added a big piece, I think, a deep threat like that.
It's such a great, I mean, well, there are a couple things here. I mean, first of all, it's such a great lesson about giving up on a quarterback, right? Like, and like how, like a lot of times, how tied to circumstances the development of a quarterback is, right? Like, there are very few quarterbacks that can overcome train wreck circumstances. And a lot of them wind up learning and growing from them. And obviously, Sam's an example of it. Baker's an example of it. Daniel Jones is now becoming an example of it. Geno was an example of it. So there's that. I think the other thing is that's interesting about this is like what this was fueled by, which to me is what would give the Jets fans hope in their approach now is like what fueled the Seahawks, retooling was the Russell Wilson trade and how they turned those picks into players, whether you're talking about Charles Cross or JSN or Devin Witherspoon, the guys that they were able to hit on after they made that trade, all the capital that came in, and it's not all one for one, but the amount of capital that they had, and then having like a couple of huge drafts where you had monster pieces coming in and then complementary pieces coming in down the line, that allows you to do something like this. And what I love about the Shaheed move is like you could explain it to a 5-year-old. You know what I mean? Like it's like, okay, you have like kind of like the do-it-all weapon in JSN, right? You've got the possession receiver in Cooper Kupp, and here comes the burner who's going to complement them, right? Like we could explain that to our kids pretty easily, and they would get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like it's such a logical move, and sometimes you want to be playing checkers and not chess. And I think John Schneider was playing checkers on this one. It was like, that just makes too much sense not to add to what's a really great core of players that we've been able to build here.
Yeah, man. I mean, although I don't know if you saw the video of that dad telling his son that his favorite player in Sauce has been traded. You got to be careful explaining things to a 5-year-old these days. I don't know if you saw that video. It's pretty wild.
I need to check that out. I have not seen that.
We'll send it to you. Okay. So in the remaining minutes I have with you, who's blown up your phone about this team not making a deal or that team making a deal or not liking it? Like what is the chitter chatter amongst all those that you speak with or reach out to you saying about the Tuesday trade deadline?
I think there's a lot of curiosity on the Cowboys and kind of like how this all plays out. And what this winds up looking like, for them, where you have two trades that almost correspond with each other. And like, I actually look at this and say, like, the Cowboys came out. I mean, to me, they got a year and a half older, right? Quinnen for Micah. We can argue like what the gap is between Micah and Quinnen, but they're both great players. You get like about $20 million per year in flexibility that you didn't have if you're Dallas. You move a second-round pick up into the first round this year, and you trade like Mozzie Smith, who had fallen into disrepair for them, for Kenny Clark, who's a really valuable piece of their defensive front now. So like that's one thing. Like looking at what Dallas did, I think is interesting. As far as like anybody being a little befuddled by inaction or I don't know. I mean, like I would say. Like the Eagles obviously were active as always. Like the one thing that kind of like, jumped out at me a little bit was like, like the NFC North teams were relatively quiet.
Yeah.
Now I say that with the caveat that the Packers made a monster move before the season.
Yes, they did. Yes,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, like, no, they already moved that chess piece around.
Like,
no,
right.
Sure.
So you can't, like, it's hard to criticize them for not doing a lot at the deadline when they brought in Micah freaking Parsons in August.
Exactly. You know? Last one for you. I'm going to ask you the question I asked Kurt Warner in hour one, and you have the added help of being an information man. Week 11, it is Cardinals versus the Niners in Arizona. Your best guess of who the starting quarterbacks of that Week 11 game are going to be for Arizona and San Francisco. What do you think?
Brock Purdy and Jacoby Brissett.
Okay. Now, Kurt said Purdy and Kyler. Are you saying it's Brissett because you know Kyler's got a foot injury, or is there something going on there? What do you think?
So, like, I think Kyler is this is what's complicated about it for the Cardinals. Kyler is a spectacular individual talent. I feel like, just having talked to those guys, that Jacoby Brissett is unlocking some things with the talent that they've assembled over the last couple of years there under Monty Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon, that's at least opened their eyes, and, I think part of that is we have to look at the quarterback position more critically now. When you see Marvin Harrison coming alive, when you see Trey McBride having huge games,
Michael Wilson,
the offensive line looks better. Like there's just some things about the operation and the way that Jacoby plays the position where you look at it and say, do we have to look at these things? And I can tell you that other teams are looking at it too. I mean, I was talking to, a head coach a couple weeks ago about like the whole, reclamation project thing that you and I were just talking about, right? Like with Baker and Sam, and the two quarterbacks that came up as like potential reclamation projects for someone in 2026 were Kyler and Tua. Like two guys that like teams are looking at as like those two could be available when we get to the off season. So I think like this is unfortunate timing for Kyler, in that like a lot of that young talent that they have on that side of the ball in Arizona is ready to produce. And when you see a veteran quarterback who can just kind of put his hands at 10 and 2, and driving the car, and you're starting to get more out of, again, a Harrison, a McBride, some of the other pieces that they've assembled there, it leads to bigger picture questions. So my guess would be like that's a real discussion on Brissett. Like, and I'll be interested to see which way it goes.
Albert, you're the man. Thanks for the 25 minutes. Greatly appreciated. It just hit me why I like the new camera is because it blurs the Ohio State stuff in the background.
I'll make that clearer for you in about 4 weeks. How about that?
Watch out. No, listen. The way it's working, Sayin looks like a Heisman frontrunner. Jeremiah Smith looks like he's the Biletnikoff winner right now if he doesn't play another down. Caleb
if it's
Downs,
not Carnell Tate.
That's right, exactly. No, you got those guys. And then, of course, there's Caleb Downs. You've got a ton of talent. There's no question about it.
We might have the 5 best players in the country.
I understand that. Frequently, that happens a lot. And then big boy pants don't arrive at the stadium when it's time to take on the Michigan Wolverines. Let's just see who's got more sand. Let's see who's got more sand in those pants, Albert. We will see you soon.
I have no comeback for another 4 weeks.
We'll see. Albert, thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
You got Albert here, everybody. Here on the Rich Eisen Show. Hey, you made it all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Check us out every single day streaming live on Disney Plus and the ESPN app 12 to 3 Eastern.